Yes, hello and welcome back to the Wildcard Rewind. Week 5 is in the bag, so we are going to get into what happened.
I just want to rewind to when we were young and hard. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Yes, it is a full crew. It is Monday night. We are here. We are back. I'm joined by my two amazing co-hosts. That is Lewis and Hannah. Lewis, how are you?
Doing very well, thank you. Rams didn't have the best night last night, but to be honest, anything better than how awful people thought we were going to be is good to me. And it was mad. It was mad yesterday. We were just saying this entire season feels insane currently. So yeah, had a lot of fun. Having a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a mental week. I'll bring you in, Hannah, before we start talking about how mental this week was. But Hannah, how are you? How are you doing?
Do you know what? I'm doing great this week, Paul. I was
Yeah.
nearly sick today, but then the Bengals managed to beat the Cardinals. So here I am, and I honestly feel like the world is back to the way it should be once again. The Bengals are winning, the Cardinals are losing, and they lost to us, which is even better. And so are the Rams. I was like, this is what it was meant to be from the start of the season. So I'm feeling absolutely fantastic.
Do you know what? It comes to something where you feel fantastic because you beat the team that was projected to be 0-17 and be absolutely garbage. And then another team from the same division that was not predicted to do anything. And you're just happy because both of them teams that were predicted to be bad have lost, and a team that predicted to be really good this year have finally managed to scrape a win. Hey,
I know. Honestly, that's the only thing that can make me happy nowadays because we've been so terrible. I mean, I think it would have been way more exciting for you if you'd have managed to win, but hey, we managed to scrape it out of the bag. And the thing that I was most happy about was that actually Burrow looked like he was getting back to himself. Like he just looked like a shadow of himself the last 4 weeks, and that's really had a massive effect on the team. To me, it really shows like how big a piece Joe Burrow is on this team. If you take him away, this team is literally nothing. So I think I'm just excited, and I really hope that he continues to improve. We've got a bye week coming up soon. Then we've got like a crazy run of like the 49ers, some other great teams. It's going to be tough, but I'm kind of excited to see how we progress.
I mean, he's found the solution, which is just throw it to number one, just throw it to Jamar Chase. Like looking at the way Chase has been over the season, this was his first performance over 75 yards. He hadn't scored a touchdown beforehand. This week, 19 targets for 15 receptions, 192 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's now wide receiver 5 on the season. Like that's how crazy it was this week. It was a really, really historic performance. So yeah, it was nice to see the two of them getting back to normal. It is a shame to not come on and be celebrating with Paul. But it is nice to see Joe Burrow dealing again.
I knew you two would be sad that you couldn't gang up on me again, which is not very fair at all. I'm the nice female here. You should be taking care of me, not me.
Boo!
But there's a silver lining because in my Dynasty Home League, I've got Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. So I went in. We got to the end of the 6 o'clock games, and I was actually against my little brother, who texted me saying, "Looks like I'm well in front in the league." And then them two started connecting, and I went, "Looks like you're well behind now, doesn't it?" And so there's a silver lining. But before we get in, let's get on. Week 6 is coming, so I will mention to everyone that this week seems like a better week for bye weeks. With only the Steelers and the Packers on bye. And as we know, the Steelers, there's not many players on there that have fantasy implements for us or anything like that. So with that, we'll get into the big news of the week. I feel like we have a few players to talk about. No sort of season-ending injuries this week that are really bad, but a few sort of little ones that are niggly as such. But let's start with Anthony Richardson. He suffered an AC joint sprain, looking like he could miss a month. So I've got a couple of questions for you. One is, how do we feel about Minshew leading this team? Two, are you worried about Jonathan Taylor's usage in that game yesterday? And three, I'm adding another one in that's not the show sheet. Are we a bit worried about Anthony Richardson because he seems to be getting injured quite often? I know they're only sort of like because he's already missed a game through concussion and now he's going to miss a month and stuff like that, But how are you feeling about them?
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Gardner Minshew is in that real QB 25 to 35 range where he's a backup at the minute, and every time he'll start and people will go, he should be a starter in the NFL. And then if he actually got a starting job, people will go, we need to replace him. He's actually not good enough. Like he's sort of around the similar kind of Jacoby Brissett, Teddy Bridgewater line to me. Like I don't think he's particularly great. I think, he is good enough to run the offense. So it's not like I'm absolutely downgrading every single piece going forwards. Obviously, he'll run less than Anthony Richardson, so there could be more targets available. But the storyline this week is all going to be about the revenge game against the Jags. Not that I think there's a huge amount of revenge there to take place because he was benched for, generational quarterback Trevor Lawrence. So it was kind of fine. But to me, like, I wouldn't be kind of rushing to pick Gardner Minshew up off waivers. I think you can maybe throw him in for a spot start for a few weeks. I just don't think he's particularly great. The JT usage, I think we all should have been smarter going into this week and been still continuing to play Zach Moss and still looking at him as a DFS option. Obviously, he absolutely exploded. But it wasn't just the fact that he absolutely went off. It was the fact that Jonathan Taylor was only on the field for 15 snaps. He only saw 7 opportunities. But to be honest, it doesn't really worry me too much. Like, we should have been smart enough to realize that having spent the offseason not practicing, whether that be for injury or contract related reasons, he probably wasn't going to come straight in to a new offense with a new head coach and with a new quarterback and running in a very different way and immediately be a bell cow, especially because Zach Moss had been good. The crucial thing for me is they have just paid him. They've just made him, I think, the 3rd highest paid running back in the league. I would be surprised. Well, it would be, no, not just I would be surprised, it would be stupid to do that and then immediately bench him for a player that he is just more talented than. So JT and I wouldn't be too worried about. Maybe could be a trade target in a minute if people are worried. On the Anthony Richardson thing, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. Even when he was getting injured earlier in the season with the concussions, he takes contact in a way that I've not really seen a quarterback do. Like even looking back at the days of Cam Newton running people over, and when we look at the quarterbacks that are known for their rushing, Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, they don't take contact like a running back. They get out in space, they get their yards, and then Kyler Murray's, because of the baseball background, is incredible at sliding. Lamar Jackson has a way of he kind of jumps into the air slightly as he takes contact, so it's unlikely that anything's going to kind of fold underneath him. Anthony Richardson takes contact like a running back. This isn't me saying, that he's just a running back type thing. Like he takes contact like a running back, which means he is just going to get injured more often. Now, this one was kind of a freak, but obviously when you're taking contact as much as he has been, that kind of thing is just going to happen in the NFL. So I do think it's slightly worrying. I kind of see him in like the same lines as Justin Field at the minute, that I'm like, this is someone who's going to be a fantasy stud anytime they're on the field because they are just a game-breaking athlete. Long term, we need to see it a lot more frequently before I worry about it. Before I can start to elevate him to like a truly elite quarterback type of level. But I'm a little bit worried about the injuries.
Yeah, it just seems to be quite frequent now, doesn't it? It seems to be something all the time, and he's only played 5 games. You know what I mean? He's only played 5 games, and he's now looking like, well, he went out in that one. He's been out. So what was it? Week 2, I think he came off the pitch in the first quarter or the second quarter with a concussion. Missed week 3, came back week 4, come back in week 5, gone off again in the early part of this game. So he's only actually played week 1 and week 4 that he's played the full game. So. it is a bit of a worry. It's a bit of a concern. They need to protect him a little bit more. I love what you mentioned about the fact that he takes the hits like a running back, because he does. He doesn't protect himself the way he should. He's a big asset to that team. So I don't know. Maybe he needs a little bit more of an arm around the shoulder and a bit of educating, because he's obviously still quite young and new to the league. So, but another one I wanted to mention was Travis Kelce, when he slipped on his ankle. When he walked off the pitch and the anger that he had with him, and he was throwing his helmet down, you immediately sort of thought, this is a bad one. You know what I mean? Because when you see players that are really angry and really annoyed, they know that something's not right. But he did manage to come back out in after the half. So do we think that that's something that we need to monitor, or was it just he got the right painkillers and he was able to manage it? Because I know these medical staff are very clever with their painkillers and what they can do to numb these areas. What do you think, Hannah?
Well, from my understanding so far, this looks like a low ankle sprain rather than a high ankle sprain. Obviously, I am no medical expert, but I was just having a read from Edwin Porras on X. He's one of these, medical professionals that does a lot for fantasy, writes a lot of reports and things. And he was saying, with a low ankle sprain, there should be minimal concern, and he's highly likely to play in week 6. So I'm not overly concerned about this one, but it's kind of one of those that's kind of percolating inside my head a little bit that, he's older now. He's late 30s. This is the time when he's potentially going to start kind of picking up niggling things. And already this is the second injury this season. So it's really interesting to see. But I'm not concerned, for him in the short term. But in the longer term, I do wonder whether this is kind of the start of not the decline of Travis Kelce, but just kind of these injuries that mean that he can't perform to the level that we've seen him in the past. I'd like to make this a bit of a bigger Kansas City discussion, actually, if you don't mind. I'm just bringing this on you guys now.
Okay.
The thing that I find quite interesting this season is to me, they've been winning, so they're currently 4-1, but I just don't think this offense looks like it has been in the past. I think the issue is Kelce hasn't been quite himself, but I think this wide receiver core is very young, and I also think there's no one there that's really that talented. I think Rashee Rice is probably starting to kind of come forward as maybe a more reliable guy, but there's no one there that you're like, the Tyreek Hill that they've had in the past, that you think this guy is where the targets need to go. Obviously, Kelce is taking a lot of these targets now, but to me, they just don't look quite right. And I just have this feeling that, yes, they're going to probably do quite well in the regular season, but I think in the playoffs, they're going to probably start to struggle. And I think I'm not convinced that they're going to be as good as they have been in the past. And they're kind of covering it over because they're winning. But I'm interested to see what you guys think from a general point of view. And also, I think Mahomes, again, from a fantasy perspective, has been a little bit disappointing. Same with Kelce. So obviously, we know he's been injured, but currently he's looking at 16.8 points per game. That's actually the tight end 2 on the season. As I say, there's a game missing. So, I get that. But last season, he was like a top-end wide receiver 1 with the points per game that he was getting. This season, he's actually a high-end wide receiver 2. He's about the wide receiver 16. So he's not firing on all cylinders. I don't think Mahomes for fantasy is firing on all cylinders. And I just generally think this offense is not quite right. And I'm just interested to see what you guys think on it.
I think it's quite interesting looking at. So it's one of the first things that comes to mind. I'm going to touch a little bit on Rashee Rice later, so I'm going to save my thoughts on him for a bit. Is I think we actually might have undervalued Juju Smith-Schuster last year and the impact that he had. Because I think the Chiefs are almost taking it slightly too far. That 2021 they have Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and they absolutely dominate. Tyreek Hill wants a massive payday. They don't have room because they're paying Patrick Mahomes. They let him go. They go out and sign Juju and MVS, and they go, okay, actually, we still won the Super Bowl. Like that's fine. We can keep it going. And then I think they've taken it a step too far with. We don't need any wide receivers. We can roll out any wide receiver and Patrick Mahomes will still make it work. And like Juju is absolutely sort of an above average player in the NFL. And I use above average like very literally. And I think that the worry is at the moment there's so much development needed in that wide receiver core. If this was a wide receiver core, say if you swapped it with the Texans, if CJ Stroud was playing with this wide receiver core, you'd be like, yeah, brilliant. There's a lot of talent there. They can all grow together. There's some young players who could explode. The problem is it's just not in the right place that they need to be with Mahomes. They should be competing every single year, and they probably still will because he's the best quarterback in the league. But I do agree with you that like it's a little worrying how unable they are to make plays and kind of taking a bit too far well, if we have Mahomes, he'll elevate everyone on the field, and he will, but like you do need someone that can make plays on their own a little bit as well.
I want to agree with you, but sadly I'm gonna disagree with you because, you know, I think they only just lost to the Lions on that the opening game. Was it the opening game of the season? They lost to the Lions. You know, they lost by 1 point in that game. If they'd have won that, we'd be talking about a 5-0 team who somehow are not firing. I agree with you that they're not firing on all cylinders, but they somehow managed to get these wins week in, week out, you know. And what I've seen with the Chiefs in the past is they just get better and better and better and better as they go. And I just think this it is a young wide receiver core. It is full of, you know, you've got a couple of rookies in there, and they're not, you haven't got this standalone one. You know, Travis Kelce's your standalone guy that demands everything, but somehow they just week in, week out just get wins all the time, you know. And it's just, they're just a team that I never seem to worry about. I just sort of go, do you know what, they are going to be. I will agree with you in a sense that I do think they dominate the regular season. I think the playoffs this year is going to be a whole different ball game. I think what the Bills did against the Dolphins, was just unreal. And I just think if they can make everything click like that, I can't see anyone beating them at the moment. You know, I can't see anyone sort of stopping that team if they get everything right. And I just think the Chiefs may come stuck in the playoffs, you know. So I will agree with you on that sense, but I'm not worried with the Chiefs as such. Andy Reid is a magician, and he just makes magic happen, and I don't know how he does it.
Weeks 9 and 10, the Chiefs play the Dolphins, then the Eagles. I think that's the stretch. Like their next few games, they do have the Chargers, but they play the Broncos twice. Like I think that week 9 and 10.
Oh, start every Chiefs player, start them all. Start them all. They're all gonna. You can have a touchdown. You can have a touchdown. You can have a touchdown. You know. But yeah, is there anything you wanted to add to that, Hannah?
No, I mean, I just think that I'm not convinced that they can just rely on Patrick Mahomes this season, which is, I personally think, what they kind of did do last season. I mean, again, I do think Juju and whatever had more of a role than we kind of gave them credit for. But I just, you know, we saw how many drops they had in that week 1 game. I know, yes, they've probably cleaned it up a little bit since then, but I just think that this wide receiver core, I don't feel it's reliable enough. And I'm interested to see, you know, the defense has been playing very well, and I think that has helped them. But I'm really interested to see when they start playing the Dolphins, Eagles, these high-powered offenses, how they cope, because they don't run up and down the field as well as they have previously. So I'm interested just to see how they go. And as I say, we're used to seeing Mahomes top 1, 2, and 3, you know, QBs in fantasy. And this season, we've just not seen him there the last 5 weeks. You know, so I just think he's not quite, you know, they're not all quite themselves, I don't think, yet.
So listeners, you heard it here first. Hannah says sell Patrick Mahomes.
Well, what is he so far? QB6? No, QB 8 so far on the season. But you'll have drafted him in what? Round 2, 3?
Yeah.
You know, I'd expect more than that from somebody in that, you know.
I get it, and I love it. And that's what we're here to break down. But before we move on to rewind the tape, a couple of other players that I wanted to mention. I didn't want to get too deep into these. Maybe you guys can maybe enlighten me with a couple of other injuries if there was. But a couple I just wanted to mention was James Conner has a knee injury. I can't pronounce the name of his backup. It's just too difficult. And Justin Jefferson has a hamstring injury. I feel like they're keeping all of that very close to what, like the Vikings group. They're very much not letting in on anything. They're not going, oh, it's potentially this. He could miss this. They're literally just saying it's a hamstring. We're going to get further tests, and that's it. They're being as cold as ice with it, which makes me really, really worried about it.
Yeah, they came out earlier today in the interview with Kevin O'Connell, and he was really beating around the bush and trying not to say anything, like, which I agree. I think he said the team has to make sure it protects him from himself, and that Justin Jefferson's a competitor and he'll want to get out there. Now that to me tells me he's hurt and he needs to take a couple of games off. So your favorite stud of the week, Jordan Addison, to the moon from here on in.
I was going to use him as my stud of the week this week, and I thought I'm just going to get abused, so I went in another direction. But Hannah, how do you feel about Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, I mean, a hammy is rare, isn't it, that they're going to come back the next week? I'd be very, very surprised. And it's just crap, isn't it? Because, we know he's elite. We know he'll put up lots of points and he's just not going to be there. I am kind of excited, though, to see what Jordan Addison can do now. This is his time to shine. He has to show that he is the round one pick that they, took. So I have him on a few teams, so I'm kind of excited to see what he can do. But everyone, it's crap. Justin Jefferson's out. We've just got Cooper Kupp back, and now we've probably lost Justin Jefferson for a few weeks. It is just crap.
Yeah, and I think the Vikings at 1-4 are not really benefiting themselves if they rush Justin Jefferson out there. To me, it's one of them. If he is injured, even if you think he could be back in 2, why not bang him on IR and go, do you know what? Because at the end of the day, they don't care about fantasy football. They don't care about us and our teams and everything like that. They've got to go, do you know what? Our season is a write-off at this moment. We're not going to do much. Why not just put him on IR, wait 4 weeks, bring him back, let him recover, and then just roll with him then and see where you are, So, but also going back to the Cardinals, Amari DeMarcado. Oh, see, nearly.
Because every time they said it when I was watching the game yesterday, I thought they were calling him Dean Mercado, which just sounds like someone who would own like an Italian sandwich shop in New York.
Yeah, he's definitely worth a pickup to me, to be honest. After James Conner went out, he was the guy that they did use to rush the ball. Not that the Cardinals' offense is really that great, to be honest. So, but if you are the James Conner owner and you are looking for somebody, then he is somebody I'd definitely be looking to pick up. With that'll be the end of the big news. Let's move on to rewind the tape. In this segment, we're going to discuss things that we have learned from the previous week that helps us as fantasy managers. So, Lewis, we're going to come straight to you, mate. What did you learn this week?
When I was looking back at last week, the thing that I really think is important is if you are debating which running back to start on a team, the answer is neither of them. We kind of touched upon this. I think there's a slight inkling of it when we talk about Jonathan Taylor as well, when you're uncertain. Obviously, Zach Moss did go off. But when you look at a few teams where we're a little bit unclear on the running back situation, and sometimes it's when there's a starter missing. So with the Ravens, Gus Edwards saw more rushing workload, but really underperformed. Justice Hill did score a touchdown. Aside from that, it would have been really low scoring, less than 7 PPR points for both of them. On the Panthers, with Miles Sanders slightly beaten up, Miles Sanders had 7 carries for 32 yards. Jabba Hubbard had 9 for 35. Again, pretty poor on both sides. Then the Giants with Saquon Barkley out. If you were in a really have a lot of starters in your league, or a lot of players in your league, might have been looking at one of these players. Matt Breeder, 9 carries for 21 yards. Eric Gray, 12 for 25. They also both had 1 reception for 0 yards, which I thought was quite interesting. But I think the learning point here is like running back is such a volume-based position, and if you're uncertain that your player is going to get that volume, it's probably unlikely that you can start them, unless they are the sort of, lightning quick or really exciting player that can absolutely break one. If they're not getting a huge amount of volume, and if you're not confident they're going to get goal line work, or if they're on a bad offense, which is something we've spoken about a lot looking at the Panthers and the Giants, even if they might get goal line work, the team might just not get to the goal line. I think if you're uncertain which of a couple of running backs, if the backfield's a little murky beforehand, just avoid it and just go with a different option.
Yeah, I really like that. I've been burnt a few times this season with either Gus Edwards or Matt Breeder or Miles Sanders. So goes to show you how my fantasy season is going so far. But yeah, I think that's a really good thing. I think running backs are really poor this year. Yeah, really poor. I think teams I'm finding that are doing well in leagues are the teams that have the elite running backs. I think there's a big difference between top scoring running backs and the ones that normally grind you 5, 6, maybe 10 points. I think there's a big difference this year. But Hannah, what did you learn this week apart from the Bengals can actually throw the ball and that player can catch it,
Well, that was my favourite thing that I learned. But for me, it's kind of a bit of a reminder, really, that this is a long season, and that sometimes I think we panic a little bit early. And I think especially when you're looking at a team that's like 0-4, 1-3, and they're not doing particularly well, but you've got these talented players on your team and you're like, why are these guys underperforming? I think ultimately you've got to remember it's a long season and that talented players typically will find a way to perform. So I think we've got some great examples this week. Obviously, Jamar Chase, who we've discussed quite a lot already. Breece Hall had a great week. We'll mention that a bit later. Tick for me. And, obviously Cooper Kupp came back from injury and put up a fantastic week. All of these guys were studs that we... Okay, Breece, maybe we did draft him a little bit low because of his injury, but, ultimately talent does win out. And even though, they might be in difficult situations or things are not going their way for a few weeks, ultimately they usually will figure it out. And your studs typically won't underperform the whole of the season. Usually I find that people that are drafted highly that underperformed are guys that we inaccurately predict what their role is going to be in the offense. But, these studs like Chase, Breece Hall, all of these really talented players that we know this is what their role is going to be, they will produce for you in the end. And I think, there's been a lot of panicking. Oh, this guy's not producing, the team's terrible, blah, 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 blah. And ultimately they do find a way.
Yeah. Cooper Kupp really annoyed me this week because I was a bit wary with him and I was like, oh, are they going to limit him his first one back? And I was like, do you know what? I'm not going to get burnt by it. I'm going to leave him. I've got him in a couple of places. I'll leave him on the bench. He's not going to be used that much. And then I watched that game. And it was like, oh, Cooper Kupp. Oh, Cooper Kupp. Oh, Cooper Kupp. And I'm just going, well, do you know what? I quit this.
He got like 60 yards on the opening drive. Like,
yeah. And then it was like, oh, Jamar Chase. Oh God, this is just awful. Like I'm just I'm going to bed. But no, I completely agree with you that these studs do it. We've seen it many a times where Travis Kelce's come back and he's done it with Cooper Kupp. He's done it. Tyreek Hill, he somehow does it most weeks. Breece Hall, legend. It is they do perform even when you think, oh, they can't perform against that team. That team's got good corners or something like that, and then they still manage to do it. One thing I did like about this week with Cooper Kupp, though, was he came back. He immediately got all of these targets straight away, but so did Puka Nacua. Yeah, and it was so nice to see because a lot of people were like, "Oh, when Cooper Kupp comes back, Puka's going to be nothing again." It's all going to be Cooper Kupp, and Sean McVay has obviously now gone. I've got two amazing wide receivers, and I'm going to use them both to the best of my abilities.
I never got that narrative because it's not like you only play one wide receiver in the game. Typically, at a minimum, you're usually going to have two wide receivers on the field. Like, it just didn't make sense to me that they, why would all of a sudden only one wide receiver be relevant? I understand he's immensely talented and obviously he's fantastic, but Puka has shown that he is also talented and is worthy getting the ball. So it just didn't make sense to me, that narrative at all.
I think the issue was always like Cooper Cup is such a target hog that it might not leave space for anyone else. Like, if you look at Cooper Cup's pace last year, there was only until he got injured, I think 1 or 2 games that he was under 10 targets, and like quite a few over 15. Like, it's not, I think it's a little unique in the sense that, and I'm absolutely delighted, and I don't think I was particularly worried that Puka was just going to completely disappear. But I can see why people were worried that Matthew Stafford was going to go, oh, my best friend's back. My new podcast host is back. I'll just throw it to him 20 times a game again.
Oh, Hannah, did you hear that? Lewis obviously said we're his best friends. But no, I feel like people on X and some fantasy players, they're like shy horses, don't they? And they have these blinkers on so they can only see straight, like, you know what I mean? They can't see anything to the side, and they go, oh, Cooper Kupp's back, that's all we can see. We can't see anything else. And Matthew Stafford's going to throw the ball a lot more than 15 times in a game, so there's targets to go around. It was just nice to see Sean McVay trusting both of them sort of on the same level,
Yeah, just quickly, I think last year that there was no one else, was there? Like, Robert Woods he'd left at that point, hadn't he? Or if not, he was still recovering from his injury. Like, there was no one, literally no one else.
Yeah, it was Allen Robinson was the wide receiver too, and we all saw that.
That was it. Exactly, like there was literally no one. So he's going to get everything. Whereas now that Puka's, shown that he can be trustworthy, I just didn't see how he couldn't be factored in some way into the offense.
Yeah, and with all this Puka talk, we're gonna look at some of the other rookies. I did really well with that, didn't I? What a great segue. I want to have a bit of a discussion with you guys now. I feel like we've sort of seen 5 weeks of these rookies, and I just want to sort of see how you guys feel about these rookies and what sort of way you'd rank them nowadays. On the show sheet, that's kind of how I'd rank them. I don't know if you guys had noticed, but we'll start with QBs, and the way that I've got them ranked at the moment, the way that I play them is CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, then Bryce Young. Are you guys in agreement with me? How are you feeling that these guys are doing so far this season? To me, CJ Stroud, we spoke about it earlier, is just absolutely bossing this. I think a lot of people coming when he was before he's drafted were saying he's going to fall down the draft board. A lot of people were off him, so people were in him and everything like this. He was the one that nobody could really sort of put their finger on. Bryce Young was always going to be the number one. Anthony Richardson was somebody that could potentially go at 2. And I think at the moment, CJ Stroud is proven to be the best QB out of a lot of them. How do you feel?
Yeah, completely agreed. And CJ Stroud looks like genuinely generational, and I think it's quite an interesting thing because a lot of the quarterbacks that have come into the league recently that we've been really excited about have been these sort of kind of in the Anthony Richardson mold, which is like these super weapons with huge arms and can use their legs and make these huge like off-schedule plays. And CJ Stroud isn't really that. Like, I think I saw a lot of people comparing him pre-draft to Jared Goff, which is basically saying that he's someone that works best on schedule, very accurate. We'll put it in the right place. Reminds me a little bit of Tua in that is just about sort of distributing it in the right moment. But he has looked absolutely unbelievable. The one I'm really worried about, I agree with this order for sure. Like Bryce Young, I'm concerned about. And I know we were talking about this before recording, like there's a real world in which this is the worst wide receiver core that Bryce Young has ever thrown to. Adam Thielen is doing quite well, but that's because they just don't have anyone else to throw it to at the minute. Like Jonathan Mingo is someone I like to pre-draft, but again, you don't really want to be relying on a rookie to be your wide receiver one going straight into the season. Bryce Young worries me. He's making mistakes that I didn't see him make in college, and that's a strange thing that when you continue, it's almost less concerning when you continue to make the same mistakes that you were making in college, because you're like, okay, that's something we know is an issue with the player. They can learn, they can come past that. When they're making new mistakes, you're a bit like, well, why have you lost the ability to do that? Like you could throw that back shoulder throw in college. Why are you now putting it straight onto the cornerback's chest, which happened in the game just gone? Like, so Bryce Young, I'm a little worried about at the minute.
Yeah, I agree. Hannah, what are you thinking?
From a fantasy perspective, I do have a mini disagreement in that when Anthony Richardson is healthy, I would put him as the QB1, because in his 2 healthy games, he finished as a QB2 and the QB4, whereas Stroud has highest finish this season has been the QB10. So I think ultimately Richardson's floor and ceiling are higher than Stroud from a fantasy perspective. But obviously, if we keep getting these injuries from Richardson and he's not on the field, then, he is less valuable than Stroud, who ultimately is on the field. But I would still put Richardson before Stroud at this point.
I think Richardson is your ceiling play, isn't he? Whereas like CJ Stroud is your safe. He's going to get you them points. He's going to tick over each week and get you them points. But if you want to go and boss it towards the end of the season or something, Anthony Richardson is that guy that can go and win you a week. Whereas CJ Stroud's going to get you enough points to maybe be a challenge. You know what I mean? So yes, I suppose I could agree with you. I just need to see more of Anthony Richardson being healthy to put him above CJ Stroud at the moment. But we're going to jump into the running backs. I think this one is there's a lot of question marks with the running backs more than anything. Bijan is Bijan, and he's top of the list for me, even though Achan is obviously outperforming him so far this season, isn't he? And can you still hear me? I've lost all my sound.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, my volume just dropped, so I couldn't hear anything. But yeah, so we've got Bijan and Achan, and then we've got Jamar Gibbs, Zach Charbonnet, Tajay Spears, and I've thrown him in there because I love him, Tank Bigsby. Is there anyone else that you'd like? I'll go to you first, Hannah. Is there anyone else that you'd put in this list, or is there anyone that you'd move around in this list now?
From this list-wise, I would probably put Spears in front of Charbonnet, purely because I think he's been running really nicely. I know that King Henry is still, leading, the backfield there. But I think if Henry went down, Spears would really happily take over this backfield and really not have a problem. He's actually had more yards per carry than Henry in 4 of the past 5 games. I think he's actually the more explosive guy on the team at this point, and I think ultimately he is going to become the lead running back in this backfield next season, if not the end of this season, depending on how things progress. So I would probably put Spears in front of Charbonnet, purely because we've just not seen Charbonnet do so much. He's just not had a lot of involvement in this offense because things have been going so well. With I've gone blank. I can't remember his name.
Kenneth Walker.
That's the one. Kenneth Walker has been doing really, really well this season. They've just not had kind of a need for Charbonnet. So for me, he goes behind Bigsby. He's been doing okay, but again, much less of a role than I expected him to have, which has been a bit of a disappointment for me, to be honest. Again, if Etienne went down, I'm sure that he would have more involvement and do a bit more. But I think top 3, I agree. Spears, I would put in front of Sharps.
Love it. Lewis, what do you think?
Same as Hannah. I think the crucial thing to me is just looking at where the tier breaks are. So Bijan, tier of his own. And I was talking about this on X about the dynasty running back landscape. That's pretty garbage at the minute. Bijan, Devon Achan, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then a big old drop. And to be honest, there's a big drop between Bijan and between Bijan and Achan, and then Jahmyr Gibbs at the minute, just because we're not seeing Gibbs do it. But it's a real worry. We thought that this running back class, a few years ago, we were looking at this running back class as being genuinely generational. And it is just because of Bijan Robinson. But it's a real worry about the rest of the running backs in the class after Gibbs, really. They're not hugely exciting at the minute.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the big gap between HN and Gibbs, because that was something I was about to say. I was going to say Gibbs, to me, I was relatively high on Gibbs coming out of the draft process, and when the Lions took him in round 1 and stuff, and I was like, oh, they're all in on him as well. And then they got rid of Swift for a 5th and stuff, and I was like, oh, this guy's obviously something special to them. And then they just don't use him. I don't know if they're maybe letting him develop in the team or get a spot in the, I don't know what it is. I don't know why they don't sort of use him the way that we think they can. But yeah, I think the running backs is all a bit garbage, really, isn't it? Apart from Bijan, I think Achan's all surprised everyone as well with how he's playing and what Mike McDaniel's doing with him. So it's all a bit of a question mark in the running back room. But I'm going to save the wide receivers and tight ends for next week. So we'll get into them next week. But we're going to go to the fantasy stud of the week. Here we're going to look at our under the radar player who could outperform and exceed expectations in week 6. But first of all, we'll have a look at last week. Lewis, you went for Wan'Dale Robinson, who managed 5 receptions for 18 yards. And Hannah, you absolutely smashed this. Although I don't think this is an under the radar kind of stud. We could debate this because you went for a top 5 running back in Breece Hall, who had himself a day and had 22 rushes for 177 yards, a single touchdown, and also 3 receptions for 17 yards. But that was last week. Let's get into this week, and we'll start with you, Lewis. Who is your fantasy stud of the week?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this earlier. I said I was going to talk a bit more about Rashee Rice, obviously rookie wide receiver for the Chiefs. He this week had 5 targets, 4 receptions, 33 yards, and a touchdown, which is obviously fine. That's not hugely exciting. The touchdown's pretty good. They are playing the Broncos, which, as you were saying earlier, that's very, very exciting for fantasy. The Broncos defense has been terrible, but also because Rice isn't the clear number 1, like the Broncos basically have one good player on defense, and that's Pat Surtain, and we can't be sure who he'll be tracking. He has had more targets on the season than any other Chiefs wide receiver. He's also top on the Chiefs in yards per route run, which is obviously a metric which is slightly better in predicting future performance and showing how someone's actually performing on the field. He's 14th among all wide receivers in yards per route run. He was also PFF's highest graded player on the Chiefs in week 5. So I think in an unclear depth chart at wide receiver, he's someone they invested a 2nd round pick in. He's looked good so far. They are playing a trash defense, and he did score a touchdown this week. I think this might be Rashee Rice week going forwards.
Ooh, I'd love a Rashee Rice breakout week.
Yeah.
Oh, that would bring me much joy. Hannah, who's your stud of the week? Are you taking another top 10 player this week, or are you going to actually go for an under the radar player?
Well, that's not very fair, because I'd just like to point out he had been underperforming so far, and that's what we're saying, who could overperform and exceed expectations, where we weren't expecting too much from him. So I feel like I'm trying to justify my very reasonable pick.
But whatever helps you sleep at night, Hannah,
Since I know that you two would be ganging up on me, I've gone a bit more under the radar this week. And I've gone for Cade Otton, tight end of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So they play the Lions this week, who actually have been rather terrible against tight ends so far. So up until week 4, I haven't got the latest data from this week, but they have given up the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position so far, and they're actually pretty reasonable against wide receivers. So they're 17th. So they're not one of the worst. So I'm thinking it might be a bit more of a struggle. I think this defense is much better generally. I think it might be a bit more of a struggle for the wide receivers this week, and hopefully Cade Otton will be getting open a bit more, and we'll be getting a couple of touchdowns. All we need from him is the touchdowns. We don't need yards. We don't need much else. Just a couple of touchdowns, and I think this could be his week if this is the position that they struggle to play against.
Yeah, it's hard to get any data for the Lions against the tight ends because they played the Panthers this week, who are just garbage. So you don't look at that data, just ignore that one. But I've taken your sort of strategy here, Hannah, and I've gone for Isaiah Pacheco. Now I haven't gone for a top 10 running back or anything like that, but I've gone for the running back that's playing the Broncos. Okay.
I would just like to say, when we drafted in the summer, he wasn't drafted as a top 10 running back, as you recall. He was being drafted at the earliest in the 3rd round, if not later.
Okay, whatever helps you sleep at night.
I went for Wan'Dale Robinson. He was going undrafted.
But I would just like to say that Pacheco has finished as the running back 6 1 week this season. That's not under the radar, Paul.
It's okay, Hannah. It's okay. We'll allow it.
No, you'll allow it because you're the host. I disagree with the ability to pick Isaiah Pacheco, but carry on because you know.
No, but you can have Breece Hall last week, you know.
He was underperforming.
It's such a civil show when you're not here, Paul.
It's great, isn't it? I love to just bring the heat and the fire and everything. I love it. But yeah, I've gone for Isaiah Pacheco.
Well, I hope he does rubbish.
Wow, I love you too, Hannah. Okay, I love you too. But I'm just looking at what happened last week against the Broncos and the running back that played against the Broncos, and I'm thinking the Chiefs are playing the Broncos, and if they just give him the ball to run, he's going to run through them again. So you know, I'm just gonna use that strategy and just steal Hannah's way of thinking. You know, so I've gone for Isaiah Pacheco against the Broncos. But we'll now move on to our fantasy scare of the week. Here we're going to look at hyped up players who could underperform and upset us and our fantasy teams in week 6. Last week, Lewis, you went for Trevor Lawrence, who managed 315 passing yards and 0 touchdowns and 31 rushing yards off PFF. I can't remember what I set the score in that. He was QB 15. So middle of the bag. And Hannah, you smashed this again. And you went for Kyron Williams, who only managed 53 rushing yards and 4 receiving yards against the Eagles defense. So fair play to you, Hannah. You smashed that one.
It's clear that everyone should be listening to me all of the time.
It's clear. It's definitely clear for that. But we'll get into your scare of the week first, then, shall we? Hannah, who is your scare of the week this week?
Okay, so look, I've been a bit bolder this week because I know you'll just be saying, "Oh, you're taking it too easy." So I've gone for a bit of I think this could really backfire on me, but I'm going for it anyway. I'm going to say that it's going to be AJ Brown. So they play the Jets D this week, who've given up some of the fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. Obviously, we know that they've got Sauce Gardner. Now, you know, typically you don't see them shadowing on every play, but I think they're going to try and get Sauce lined up with AJ Brown as much as they possibly can. So I could see AJ Brown having a bit of a poor week this week. So I'm going to put it out on a limb and say AJ Brown.
I love that. I love that. Now, that's what this segment is about. Picking a stud who may not perform, not picking a stud who can perform.
To be fair, in this segment, I actually did quite well. Kyron Williams was considered a stud so far.
I love it. I love it.
I've done all right in this segment. It's the previous one.
I love both picks, to be fair. I love the boldness of that. And as we well know, Sauce Gardner is an absolute beast. So if he's covering AJ Brown, he's going to have a tough day. Lewis, let's get into your scare of the week.
Yeah, I think someone like a Le'Veon Bell, I think, could really struggle to perform this week. I think it's quite likely he'll. Sorry, I'm going for Hannah's approach.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, look, she's nice to you. Me, she's going to throw it in my face. She was like, "Okay, Lewis, that's fine."
Make the same joke again in a minute, Paul, and see what she does.
Okay.
I'd just like to say, I did this once. This is not my approach. I don't know where this has come from. And actually, Breece was underperforming. And he's clearly not on the radar. He's like
We've allowed
know,
it. We've
he was
allowed it.
undrafted
It's fine,
player.
yeah. It's
We
fine.
allowed it because we love
Um,
you.
I've gone.
So Le'Veon Bell, yeah.
Yeah, Lev Bell. No, I've gone David Montgomery. I think it could be really interesting with them playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. Obviously, we know how good the Lions O-line is, but we also know how good the Bucs D-line is, especially Vita Vea up the middle. And I think it could be quite interesting with the nature of David Montgomery's running style and the amount that they like to run through the tackles. I think it could be a really interesting one. I think there's a world in which they can't impose their will on the Bucs in the same way they, were able to against the Panthers last week, and they really have been able to against teams the majority of the year. So I think David Montgomery definitely could be an option to underperform this week. I think it will be quite interesting seeing the way that I think that's a really interesting matchup if you're someone that likes trench play. Watch the O-line versus the D-line every time they cut to this game.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great game. To be fair, who do you think wins that one? Sorry, just curious.
Lions. I can't. I think the Lions might be the third best team in the NFC at the moment.
So you think it's the 49ers, the Rams, and then the Lions?
No,
Yeah?
49ers, Eagles, then Lions. 49ers, Cardinals, Lions.
No, mate. Do you know what? I can only dream of a day like that, But yeah, so my fantasy scare is somebody who I think is maybe a bit cheating, to be honest. And I'm probably opening myself up for that, and that's Josh Jacobs. He hasn't had the best start to the season, but I just think people drafted him to be something, and I just don't think this week is going to be the one. I think people are going to want to play him with the news that Devontae Adams could miss this week. I think people are going to want to play him, but I'm completely staying off Josh Jacobs this week. I'm a little bit worried about where the team's taking him and what they're doing with him. I just think he's not delivering on that, and ultimately they're playing the New England Patriots, and we all know that Bill Belichick likes to take away a team's best asset. And now if Devontae Adams is out, the Raiders' best asset is Josh Jacobs, and he will make sure that he can't use him.
Yeah, I was actually really tempted by this one when I was looking into the matchups for next week. So, I think, especially like a furious Bill Belichick, I think could be quite interesting to see how Josh Jacobs does next week.
So literally, I just want to throw something out there. I just want a yes or no answer off both of you. Do you think Bill Belichick gets sacked before the end of the season?
No.
No, I don't think before the end.
Just curious, the 1-4 Patriots that can't do anything.
I do think at the end, though. I do think at the end.
I don't know that he'll ever get sacked. I think it might be a case of they agree that it's time for him to step down. But I can't see with the amount he's done for the organization them actually sacking him.
Agreed. I think he's done enough there to warrant a peaceful ending, But yeah, with that, we'll move on to the wild card of the week. We're each going to give a hot take that could happen this week. Hannah, you were so close to getting a full house, but unfortunately, Ridley had 122 yards and Kirk only had 78. You said Kirk was going to have more receiving yards than Ridley. Lewis, you said Zach Wilson would finish as a QB, as a top 12 QB, and funnily enough, not even Zach Wilson can manage to score big against a really shit team. He's at the moment, I think he sits at QB 22, so he's not even close. Bless him. But let's see what we think could ring true this week. So, Lewis, we're going to come to you first.
Daniel Jones is injured, might miss the week. The Giants scored their first half touchdown this week, but it was a defensive touchdown. If the Giants start Tyrod Taylor, if Daniel Jones misses time, they will score their first offensive touchdown in the first half of a game of the season so far.
That shouldn't.
It shouldn't be something I have to say, should it? But
not in week 6 of the NFL, like, you know what I mean? Surely they should have got one by now.
man,
Hannah, you keeping the London theme?
I am. I've done the London theme for the past 2 weeks, so I have to stick with it this week. And I'm going to say that Lamar Jackson has more rushing yards than Derrick Henry. I think that's could quite possibly happen.
I agree with that. To be fair, I think that one's well within the realms of actually happening. I've also gone for a London game this week, as I'm going to be sat in the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium watching this one. So I've gone for the Titans finally get their shit together, and I think that they beat the Ravens, and the Ravens' misery continues after their awful loss against the Steelers.
I can see it. I can definitely see it. The Ravens have such bad injury luck, such bad luck with wide receivers dropping passes all over the place. And we know that the Titans can run over teams if they piece it together. I think, are all three of us at the game this week?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think
really
so.
looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm going to try and be sober on Sunday morning, because I'm going with both of my brothers, and we're meeting in London town on Saturday. So, and Wales are in the quarterfinals of the World Cup on Saturday afternoon as well. So, if I make the game, it'll be a miracle, you know.
So you might not be drunk, but you'll probably be hungover.
Very, very, very hungover. But yeah, with that, guys, we'll come to the end of the show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind, or head on over to our YouTube channel, search for the Fantasy Wildcard Podcast Network, and make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. And we shall be back next week for week 6. I'm getting my day. I'm getting my weeks. We've just done week 5. We're going into week 6, aren't we?
It was such a smooth closing, and then you just got confused as to what week it was right at the end.
I haven't written it down. I'm just making sure I've got the right week. But yeah, tune in to us next week as we rewind week 6.